Welcome to the Business of Us podcast, where we explore the intersection of business, relationships, and family life. This season, we're focusing on the concept of the three mountains of partnership, purpose, and passion, which are the three big challenges that all couples face throughout their relationship. Whether you're scaling your first mountain or learning to navigate life after the summit, these episodes will give you stories, strategies, and inspiration for the journey. It is my pleasure to introduce my co-host, Cameron Medill, who founded a multi-million-dollar company that he sold to his team in 2019, which led him to realize that his true passion is helping people build strong relationships. He's conducted research with over 600 entrepreneurs and their spouses, and you can read his work at relationshipscienceguide.com.
Thanks, Jamie. My pleasure. Now I get to introduce Jamie. Jamie is a licensed therapist who works globally with entrepreneurs and their families. She's a sought-after speaker, retreat leader, and workshop facilitator. And Jamie's real passion is helping entrepreneurs and their families to navigate the intersection of mental, relational, and family wellness. Please keep in mind our podcast is for information only and is not therapy. If you need professional support, we recommend visiting psychologytoday.com. All right. Today's big question: how might thinking about our relationship in reverse from our shared legacy at the end back to the present moment today change its trajectory? I can't think of two better people to talk about this today than our guest, Brian and Jean Brault. Brian is a serial entrepreneur, former global chairman of Entrepreneurs Organization, and co-founder of Legacy of Significance, where he coaches leaders on building companies and lives that endure. Jean is the co-founder of Legacy of Significance, and she brings a lifetime of experience in transformational retreat work. She and Brian collaborate to help guide couples and families towards deeper purpose, connection, and intentional living. Jean and Brian are proud parents to 3 children and proud grandparents to another 8 kids, outdoor enthusiasts, and they're active in their church and their community. Jean and Brian, thanks for joining us today.
Oh, Cameron and Jamie,
Thank you.
thrilled to be here. Fun times.
All right, so as I set things up, let's jump to the end. I love how you two are passionate about this concept of legacy. I've usually heard this talked about kind of on an individual level. So, I'm someone's reading at my funeral, they're reading the eulogy or the ugoogly as they called it in Zoolander. But I usually hear it as kind of this personal thing, right? Like achieve your passion. And I love how you guys have this focus on the couple or the family. And so I'm curious, what does legacy look like when we think about it from that family couple level? And how can you best develop it to stay on track as a couple?
First, if you're okay with it, I'd like to kind of talk a little bit about how we look at legacy in and of itself. And that is that we believe that we don't get to define our legacy. What we get to do is choose how we show up, our behaviors, our responses, the way we care for others, what we do when no one's watching. That's what's within our control. And we can be purposeful and live a life by design in hopes that at some point in the future, the world will define our legacy the way we hope. I just think it's important to kind of maybe start out with that. And yeah, that, we have a legacy as individuals that the world will define, but hopefully in a relationship as couples, that the world will maybe look at us as a couple and maybe the impact we had. I don't know, Jean, what are your thoughts on?
Well, I liked what Cameron said in the beginning of reverse engineering in a sense, because we kind of do that in the work that we do. We start off as we talk about us as individuals, but then we also talk about us as couples and as that product of a couple. But then we help people to be at the place where they are right now, but then look backwards and say, what do you have to do to get there?
I think Jean touched on it. There's 2 components. In any relationship, we first show up as an individual in any relationship, but certainly in a marriage or a romantic relationship. And so I think honoring the individuality, because that's who you fell in love with, honoring the individuality and supporting that and supporting their hopes and their dreams and what they want their life to be, but then also recognizing that, you come together and that you start to form what you want to be as a couple as well. And one of the things that Jean and I are not a perfect couple at all, but we work at it and we choose love every day. And so we also do things in our work life or our volunteer life that help us to understand more about relationships. And one of the things I think we've done well is that we recognize that we are the ones, the primary teachers to our children of how to love and how to show up in a relationship and be in a healthy relationship. And so we recognize that and take on that responsibility and work at it. And we've also always invested in our relationship, even when the kids were young and the businesses were young. We just always did that because we knew that there was going to come a time when it was us and not the kids. And so that was important to us.
Yeah, we would go away. We would take weekends away. We'd ask for family help and watching our little ones and just go away and remember what made us fall in love in the first place. What we shared and what our dreams were. Kind of going over our dreams again.
I love that phrase. What made us fall in love in the first place? Easy to lose track of that with all the minutia of life. So I want to ask you guys, this episode, we're focused on this idea of the third mountain. This is a concept from a woman named Jennifer Petriglieri, and she kind of found that in her longitudinal research of couples, there were 3 big points where relationships either like got deeper and tighter, or they kind of stagnated, or they potentially even divorced, split up. And so the idea of the third mountain is that, you figured out how to make it work in the first mountain. In the second mountain, you've kind of really questioned, what is it I really want now that we've created some stability in a life that works? But the third mountain is this idea as kind of maybe the more external facing things, exit center stage, like work and, being parents, primary parents. What does purpose look like at that point? And I'm curious what you guys have learned about the impact of these big life changes on a relationship. I know you've had multiple kids and multiple business exits. You've worked with lots of couples over the course of their time together. So what are these big life changes? How do they impact a relationship, and how can we navigate them well?
You touch on a couple things there, kind of going back to what I said a moment ago. We have always taken time for us, and I love my children. I love my grandchildren. I've always made Jean my priority because I knew there was going to come a time when the kids moved out of the house. I guess in the early days, I never really thought of exiting my business or businesses, but for both of us, we always prioritize each other and investing in that relationship throughout every stage. But when you talk about exits or you talk about being an empty nester, they're both very similar in the sense that they're an ending and a beginning. And, when I sold my first business, I was 50 years old. The business that I was selling was 28 years old. So when you're 50 and you've had something in your life that you literally started from nothing and built it and nurtured it and just developed it into what it became, and then you're walking away from it, it's like being an empty nester, except that it's kind of gone permanently. It's like a death or a divorce almost. I can remember going through that process, and intellectually it made a lot of sense, but emotionally there was a loss. And, for me, one of the things that I've seen with hundreds of entrepreneurs that we've worked with over the years is that exiting their business isn't always quite as sexy as it sounds. I mean, yes, you may end up with a lot of money or not, and you anticipate all this freedom to live your life the way you want. But what people don't always recognize is that for years and years and years, you had purpose every day working towards something, and all of a sudden it's gone. And so it's kind of like that with being an empty nester. It depends on how many kids you have, but it could be 18, 25, maybe even 30 years where there's been such an important part of your life in raising children and all the ups and downs of life that go with that when they're not there, you're left with each other. And so whether it's exiting a business and turning to your life partner and saying, what now? Or the kids leave the home and you turn to each other and say, what now? really generally one of three things happens, or it's going to go in one of three ways. And Jean's probably the better person to explain what those different options are. But
Well, it's simple. I think that either you've prepared and you anticipate this point coming. You've stayed as a couple being the focus of your relationship or being a priority in a relationship. Or you get to this point and you're realizing, okay, the businesses or our lives and our kids have taken the priority in a relationship. Now we want us to become the priority in a relationship again. And that's where a lot of people come to us at is they value the relationship, but they want more now. They want to move on to that next step. And then of course you got the third group who haven't prioritized their relationship, who haven't focused on it through the years. And now they're so separated, they're so distant from each other that it's hard to come back. And those are the unfortunate ones that often everything else gets in the middle and now they can't find each other again, or they've grown so much in separate ways. They've grown apart and now they can't come back together again. There's three kind of ways that we've seen people go, and it's those three.
and you asked the question is how do you prepare for that? But so there are some amazing programs out there now for entrepreneurs who are looking to exit their business. And it's not just about the numbers or the valuation. It's a lot of it's about how do you prepare? What is day one after you've sold your business, or month 6 or month 1 year? I mean, Cameron, you've done that. And so what is life after the exit? And how do I prepare for that? And how do I build this transition or transaction so that it gives me that? I think the same thing in a relationship is, if we have kids, there's going to come a point where we don't anymore. And so how do we transition? How do we invest now so that there's not such a stark difference between our life? I mean, you still have your family, but it's just it changes. The day-to-day of having a family changes from a child or children to the two of you.
One of the things that we tell people is work on that relationship, work on the friendship, going back to that other statement that I made, but work on your friendship together, know each other, ask about each other's lives, be curious. It's a huge thing that I talk about is be curious. Just wonder what's going on in your partner's head that day. Why are they acting impatient, or why are they happy? The beginning is just not losing touch with each other. It's remaining friends. It's keeping that friendship going.
Yeah, I really love that. It's sort of preparing yourself to step into the space of disorientation and allowing yourself to be disoriented and having some plans to anchor you and figure out how to get reoriented to what the new space looks like. I'm curious to hear how that has impacted today, how the two of you work together, right? I mean, you've gone through these exits and transitions with your kids. And so what does that look like now for the two of you?
We've gone through a lot of transition by profession. By the first 20 years, 25 years of our relationship, I was a nurse and worked in healthcare in different roles. And Brian had his businesses and was growing his businesses. And then I stopped working in a period for the kids when we were raising them while they were in school and a lot of activities and stuff. And then I went back to work after they got older. And again, in healthcare. So business and healthcare didn't align in a lot of ways. I can remember working for a doctor and realizing she had so much on her plate because she also was the doctor, but she had to be the business person too. And then we entered into working together, and it changes our roles. It changes the way we live together because we work from home also. We don't go off to separate places and come back to home. We work from home. And the dynamics that are involved in that, we're learning still. We're still trying to figure it out and grow with it. Every day there seems to be something new to grow from. It's kind of like embracing the possibility of what it can be.
Jean talked about being a nurse. And, I talked to a number of people who work for entrepreneurs and probably are entrepreneurial people themselves, but they're just at a stage of life that they just can't take on the risk of stepping out on their own. I was lucky because Jean had a career as a nurse, and so it was her stability. She kind of financed the beginning of my first business, and had I not had that, I don't know that that business ever would have, I might not have eaten or paid my rent if it wasn't for Jean in the early days. So I was really lucky to have her kind of be my sugar mama for a couple of years to allow me to start that business. And then we made a conscious decision that for us was important, that if she could be home during the important years of our kids' life, that's what we chose to do. And that's how she partnered with me in the business world, because it allowed us to be very purposeful of how we built a business and the life that we wanted in order to be able to build that business. But where we are now, we never really worked together up until, I guess, 2019, when sold the second business and realized that we still wanted to do something and still needed to do something. And Jean just said, what would you love to do? Jump out of bed every day, even if we never made any money. It's more about living a purpose. And we both knew right away what that was. And so I love, Jamie, the way you introduced Cameron and his passion around relationships and helping others to invest in their relationships and live their best life through connection and relationships is very much about what I think we're about. And so, for us, it's really about investing in helping to create great leaders across all dimensions of their life, the kind of leaders that other people want to follow, whether that's in your work life or in family life or relationships, or when you're leading other leaders in the community or on non-for-profit boards. And so that's kind of what we get to do. So working together now, how does that work? It depends on the day. There are days when it's awesome, and then there's days when it's hard. We're both very passionate about what we do and passionate about making a difference. And the end goal is always the same, but the path to get there is different. And I've always been the entrepreneur. And so when we struggle, it's usually more my doing, just because, I teach people about how to be impactful leaders. But, when it comes to myself and Jean and I, sometimes that's hard for me to actually live out what I encourage people to be the kind of leaders and listen. And so the days that I'm not listening, the days that I'm not letting her influence me the way I'd like to, it's those are the days that we struggle a little bit more.
Brian, I appreciate the human element that you're bringing to this conversation, right? I run into that a lot as well, where it's you teach people to do certain things and people don't always recognize that we also struggle with those same things. So I appreciate you just offering that to the audience today, that none of us are able to do these things perfectly, and it's okay, right? That we continue to do these things. I think the other thing that you touched on that I'm curious about is this, authenticity among roles that we have, whether that's in personal or business as a parent, right? That we present as the same person in all of those areas. And I think a lot of times there's this talk about, right, like work-life balance and the separation between, your personal and professional life, which I personally think is a myth. And I've heard that you have said that leadership should not be compartmentalized between business and personal life. And so I'm curious if you'd say a little bit about that and talk about how leaders might be able to bridge that gap without becoming too overwhelmed.
Wow, great question. So I feel an evolved leader should not separate the way they lead in maybe, let's say, a work environment or a professional environment in the way they lead in other parts of their life. Let me explain what I mean by that. And through a leadership journey in the entrepreneurs organization, I learned the need to shift from positional authority to relational authority. And what I mean by that is, when you own a business or you have a title or you're a high level, you have a title that you have people report to you, you have positional authority. By default, you have positional authority. You employ them, you can tell them what to do, and they're supposed to do it. That doesn't really translate very well when you're leading other strong leaders. And in the entrepreneurs organization today, there's over 20,000 members, which means there's over 20,000 strong leaders that are members of this organization. So when you step into a volunteer role and you lead other leaders, you can't really tell people what to do and have it be sustainable in terms of its effectiveness. So what needs to happen is you need to learn how to lead with relational authority. And what I mean by relational authority is that you need to learn to lead through influence or lead through genuine collaboration. And genuine collaboration means that you seek out input, that you realize that the best answers are in the group, in the people you're leading. And so you ask opinions, you kind of have good, healthy conflict. And as a result, you probably are going to get the best answer, or certainly a better answer than you would on your own. And also, the notion of influencing others, but also allowing them to influence you. And so, any organization has a bottleneck. And so the width of that bottleneck is usually determined by the number of people in an organization, whether that's a business or a non-for-profit or a family, that the number of people have the ability to make decisions of substance. And so when you are leading other strong leaders and you lead through influence and collaboration, and you see leadership abilities in others and you help nurture them and empower them, you start to create more leaders. And Tom Peters, a business author, once said, great leaders don't create followers, they create more leaders. And so when you can learn to lead with relational authority, you can bring that back to your company and see leadership abilities in others and nurture and mentor and empower them. That bottleneck starts to widen because you have more leaders. And that's when organizations can scale. But that also, Jamie, applies to families. I mean, I want my children to, there are times when you need to tell your children, do this, don't do that. There's just, sometimes it's a safety thing. Sometimes they're in their formative years, they just don't understand. But there also comes a point where we are preparing our children to go off into the world and make decisions on their own and think through things. And so part of what we need to do is invite influence, invite conversation, invite them to think on their own. But it's also relationships. Jean will often say that when she's talking to a couple, and I don't want to put words in her mouth, I'll let her explain this, but that conflict is important in a relationship, because conflict means that you are a human being and that you're authentic and that you're speaking your truth and you're speaking your opinion or your perspective. And that if you do that freely, it means you feel safe to do that and you feel heard and seen. And so we could have a whole podcast just on this subject. I mean, it's so deep that if you can learn to genuinely care about the people that you're leading, and you can learn to influence them and let them influence you, and you can learn to collaborate and ask questions and be genuinely curious and interested in their perspective, yes, that helps build your company. It also helps build a stronger marriage or relationship or a family or friendships. And so, yeah, you could be talking for hours on that. So I'll be quiet there. Jean, I don't know if you have perspectives you wanted to share on that, or Jamie, you have another question. But
I was curious in your perspective, Jean, right? Because Brian has, I think the entrepreneurial perspective and talking about some of the relational authority aspects of things. And I'm just curious from you what you've learned from working with spouses of entrepreneurs, or yourself as the spouse prior to moving into where you guys are today, and just how that might be different for entrepreneurial families than perhaps other families.
I had the benefit of traveling around the world with EO and Brian. And one of the things that going into entrepreneur homes, whether it was in Pakistan or in Saudi Arabia, even in India, places that you feel like the culture is so different than ours. Families are families. Mothers are mothers, fathers are fathers, and we all are the same in a sense of wanting the best for our families, wanting our children to be healthy and happy, and wanting to succeed. So there was a commonality that I see among the families that, for me personally, it took away the fear of other entrepreneur families, and in that maybe I'm not doing it as well as somebody else, or maybe they're more successful and I could have done it a different way. We're all the same. Um, we are, in addition to that, as far as what happens within these families, also as being members in an entrepreneur experience, there's challenges that come along with being part of an entrepreneur family. The business is often the focus. There's feelings that may be hurt because of your entrepreneurial demands. And then there's also a feeling of not being seen because the business is the priority, especially in the beginning when people are starting their businesses. It may not be as bad as it winds down, but in the beginning, I think spouses, I think children often don't feel as heard or as seen as they might want to be. So those are some of the challenges that are faced. There's also the benefits of being exposed to the world, especially when we're talking about EO and having the opportunity to be exposed to so many new things and new kinds of people. There's also the benefit of the excitement of an entrepreneur. There's the roller coaster ride, but the roller coaster has ups and downs. So it goes both ways. And I think that's part of what we love about the entrepreneurs, about those of us who are spouses, those of us. Interesting, and when I first started traveling with Brian, what I did notice was that a lot of spouses are nurses or they're teachers. They tend to be some kind of nurturing role, and it makes for a good combination with the entrepreneur who, for their own reasons, need maybe a little bit more nurturing or need patience or need someone to, I don't want to say be in the background, but someone to be supportive.
You've often referred to some of the spouses that you work with or life partners that you work with that of entrepreneurs, and you talk about setting aside goals or setting aside dreams in the early stages of the business. Can you talk about that? 'Cause that's always been really significant to me.
Well, I think that I've seen with spouses this need for the entrepreneur to be the focus. And because the business is sustaining their livelihood, there's a lot of it that does need to come first. And I think because frequently we have nurturing spouses, they allow that pattern or that role to continue. I think also, though, what's happening now, and there's so many more people who are starting to work together, that now you have a different dynamic too. You've got two power people coming together, and that creates a whole different kind of need within a relationship because you need to balance, and you going back to what Brian was saying before, that need to be heard and the need to feel as though you have an influence and that you are important in the relationship. I think those are the subtle things that happen in our entrepreneurial couples relationships that maybe don't get addressed as much.
I remember one couple I interviewed referred to it as they were like locomotives switching off, and at different phases, one of them was in front. My 5-year-old loves this analogy, but just that idea of like, who sometimes not both parties' dreams, sometimes both parties can't have their dreams in the forefront at the same time, which I think is part of that give and take in a relationship. All right, I want to try a kind of silly focusing question. So by way of analogy, have any of you guys read that book? What is it? Getting Things Done by David Allen. Do you remember that? It was like this productivity phenomena, just this system to organize your life. And I had a friend who said, yeah, it's a great book if you're already like super organized. Like it was only like a productivity system that worked for super productive people. And, this friend had ADHD and a hard time keeping things organized. So I'm curious, for someone who you guys have such like a soulful perspective, you like give back in the community, you're intentional, you've invested in your relationship the whole way. I have a friend I remember who said, talking about a similarly inspirational person, they were like, I just do the opposite of everything they say. I don't meditate in the morning. I don't journal. I like to drink most nights. And so I'm curious if you to focus, if you got a couple and they're like, you know what, we're really not that like intentional. What's like the one thing you would tell them to do? Does that make sense? They're not a good client. They're
They're
not
not
ready to jump in and
intentional?
read the books.
Do
Yeah,
they
well, they're
want to
just
be
like,
intentional?
give me the one thing. They're just kind of like not that motivated.
Dream together. I think that's huge. I think creating dreams together, and it joins you together and it gives you something in the future to work towards.
Such a good answer. Brian, what about you?
Yeah, well, I don't know that I can top that one. Something along the same lines is just stay interested in each other and stay interested in what interests the other. Maybe mine's like a subset of Jean's answer, but like Jean said, it's our dreams that keep us going through tough times. It's the dreams of entrepreneurs is what kind of that vision that keeps you going when things aren't going well, and feeling like your partner is genuinely interested in you and generally interested in what's interesting to you and what matters to you, I think is important. And those aren't, you don't need to meditate for that. You don't need to journal. You don't need to do your morning routine or read a book. It's just kind of, Cameron, what you spend your life doing. It's about investing in relationships.
All right, good. Well, don't worry, Brian. You can't top Jean's answer. It wasn't a competition. She already won. So, oh wait, it is a competition. All right, let's get silly. We've been so soulful. So I want to do some quick hitting questions, just whatever comes to you. Brian, the world is dying to know. You've been up on stage in front of thousands of people. What is your favorite ice cream?
Some form of coffee ice cream since I was a kid, literally since I was a kid. It was coffee ice cream or a mocha or mocha fudge or something like that.
Mm.
All right, approve. I fully support that. That's some of the best ice cream out there. Jean, if you could have dinner with one historical person, who would it be?
Historical person, because there's lots of people right now I'd love to. Mother Teresa, I think,
Mother Teresa.
because I wonder how she stayed so present and so patient and so positive in a world that she worked in that wasn't.
Yeah, bet she's got some stories. All right,
Yeah.
Brian, what is the best advice you've ever received? That wasn't on this podcast. It came
Yeah,
from someone
so
else.
probably a mentor I had many years ago said, trust your gut. Just trust your instincts. He said, once you've been in business for a period of time, just trust your instincts. And that was really powerful. We have so much data available to now, you can always verify, but yeah, my instincts usually are I feel best about following them as well.
Mm-hmm.
I love it. All right, so Jean, if you had a hat, I don't know if you're a hat person, you're not wearing a hat, but if you had a hat and you got to wear it every day for the next year and it had one word on it, what would that word be?
One word, probably gratitude. So gratitude or compassion, the two.
You can have two words. You know what? We're making up the
Okay,
rules. Yeah, 2 words.
compassionately grateful. How about that?
There you go.
But just because there's so much in the world to be grateful for. And when we look at people compassionately and are grateful for what they offer to us or the world offers to us, it's just a better way to live, I think.
Let's do our final take. Is there anything that you all didn't get to or anything you'd really like to reiterate for our audience today?
I think that in kind of what we're doing with our life today, we often see how one or both partners have grown, and yet the relationship hasn't been invited to grow with them. And over time, success kind of quietly teaches us to prioritize outcomes over presence, results over just being focused on what really matters. And without realizing it, the person that we're building this business for, the people, the family that we're building it for, sometimes feel like they're like on the outside of that story or on the outside of that journey. And that the work in a relationship isn't really about choosing between ambition and intimacy. And when I say intimacy, I don't simply mean sexual intimacy. It could be emotional intimacy, spiritual intimacy, intellectual intimacy. experiential or physical, non-sexual or sexual intimacy, but it's not about one or the other. It's about just regularly just looking at each other, turning back to each other and saying, what is our relationship now and what do we want it to be and how do we do that together? Because I think, the risk of entrepreneurial couples isn't dreaming too big. It's waking up one day having built something extraordinary, but realizing that the relationship didn't come along for the ride. And that it's not about shrinking, the dream, but it's about making sure that the relationship is big enough, it's strong enough, it's invested enough to be able to hold that dream.
Well, thanks again for joining us. Everyone, The Business of Us is brought to you by Jamie Bourne and Cameron Bedell. Duh, you've listened to the whole episode. We get the music to our friends at Marmoset, and our theme song is Kenton by Dr. Crosby. Until the next time, we wish you the best of luck in making your relationship intentional and remarkable. And as Brian and Jean said, always remember to choose love. Thank you.